Welcome to tonight's sleep story. This tale will be accompanied by the gentle sound of rain to help you drift off to sleep. Before you get too comfortable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. Leave a comment below. It's fascinating to see how our community spans different time zones, all united in seeking a peaceful night's rest. Now, make yourself comfortable, adjust your volume, and let the rain and story guide you into peaceful dreams. Our story begins. Sarah Mitchell hadn't slept properly in weeks. The divorce papers sat unsigned on her kitchen counter back in Boston, a constant reminder of how her life had unraveled. When her great-aunt Mabel passed away, leaving her an isolated cabin in the mountains of Vermont, it felt like the universe offering her an escape. She needed time alone, away from the sympathetic glances of friends and the barely concealed judgment of colleagues. The realtor had warned her about the cabin's condition. "It's been empty for 15 years, Ms. Mitchell. Your aunt was peculiar in her later years. Refused to sell or even visit after 1998. Said the place had changed. The woman had shifted uncomfortably. You might want to consider selling as is." But Sarah needed this, needed somewhere to hide, to rebuild herself. The 2-hour drive from Boston had been therapeutic, watching the urban sprawl give way to dense forests and winding mountain roads. By the time she turned onto the gravel path leading to the cabin, late October sunshine was painting the autumn leaves in brilliant golds and crimsons. The cabin looked exactly like the photos. A solid 2-story structure of dark wood and stone, perched on the edge of a clearing. Dense forest pressed in from 3 sides, while the front offered a breathtaking view of the valley below. It was perfect, peaceful. That was before the wind started. Sarah noticed it that first evening as she unpacked boxes by lamplight. The electricity worked, surprisingly, but she enjoyed the warmth of the old oil lamps she'd found. The wind outside picked up, whistling through the trees, and for a moment, she could have sworn she heard something else beneath it, a sound like a distant voice. She paused, head tilted. The wind gusted again, stronger this time, and there it was, a high, keening sound that raised the hair on her arms. It wasn't quite a scream, but it wasn't merely wind in the eaves either. It sounded almost deliberate. Old houses make noise, she told herself firmly, unpacking another box of books. Her voice sounded thin in the large living room. "It's just settling." But as night fell and the wind grew stronger, the sounds became harder to rationalize. They took on patterns, rhythms that felt almost like words. Sarah found herself straining to understand them, then forcing herself to stop when she realized what she was doing. By midnight, she had every light in the cabin blazing. The radio turned up loud enough to drown out the wind's strange voice. She didn't sleep that first night. Every time she started to drift off, the wind would pick up again, and that sound, that terrible, almost human sound, would jerk her awake. By dawn, she was sitting in the kitchen, clutching her 4th cup of coffee, trying to convince herself she hadn't made a horrible mistake. Daylight helped. The cabin looked charming in the morning sun, all warm wood and rustic comfort. Sarah spent the day cleaning, opening windows to air out the musty rooms and exploring the space that was now hers. She found old photographs of her Aunt Mabel, looking progressively more haggard in each one. The last photo, dated 1998, showed her standing in front of the cabin. Her face was drawn, her eyes wide and haunted. She was much thinner than Sarah remembered. In the master bedroom, Sarah discovered a locked drawer in the bedside table. The key was taped to the bottom of the drawer above it. Classic Aunt Mabel, always hiding things in plain sight. Inside, she found a leather-bound journal and a stack of yellowed letters, all written in her aunt's spidery handwriting. The first journal entry was dated March 15, 1998. "It's getting worse. The winds bring them now. The voices, the screams. They're trying to tell me something, but I can't understand. Or maybe I don't want to understand. The locals say this mountain has history, dark things that happened before the cabin was built. I should have listened. Should have asked more questions when George first brought me here. But he's gone now, and I'm alone with their voices." Sarah's hands trembled as she read. She wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of an old woman living in isolation, but the wind chose that moment to rush past the cabin. The sound it made, that horrible, keening wail, seemed to pierce right through her. She slammed the journal shut and shoved it back in the drawer. This was ridiculous. She was letting her imagination run wild, influenced by her aunt's writings. The wind was just wind. Houses made noise. She was here to heal, to find peace, not to work herself into a panic over nothing. That evening, she called Lisa, her best friend back in Boston. "The cabin is beautiful," she said, pacing the kitchen. "It just needs some work. A little TLC. Are you sure about this, Sarah?" Lisa's concern crackled through the phone. "You're all alone up there. What if something happens?" "I need this, Lise. I need to be somewhere that doesn't remind me of him, of us. Everything in Boston feels tainted." "I get that, but—" Lisa's voice cut out as the wind suddenly roared around the cabin. This time, the sound was unmistakable. A scream, high and desperate, twining through the wind like a living thing. Sarah dropped the phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Sarah? Sarah, are you there?" She grabbed the phone with shaking hands. "Sorry, bad connection. Listen, I should go. The generator might not last if the wind picks up more." It was a lie. The cabin had regular power, but she needed to end this conversation. "Okay, but call me tomorrow? Promise." "Promise," Sarah whispered, and ended the call. The wind was growing stronger now, and with it came that sound again. But this time, underneath the screaming, she could have sworn she heard words. Whispered warnings, urgent and desperate. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" Sarah backed away from the windows, her breath coming in short gasps. The journal in the drawer seemed to call to her, promising answers. But did she really want to know? Did she want to discover what had driven her aunt away from this place? What had put that haunted look in her eyes? As if in answer, the wind screamed again, and this time, Sarah was certain. The sound wasn't coming from outside the cabin at all. It was coming from within the walls themselves, as if the very structure was trying to speak, or trying to warn her. Night was falling, and Sarah Mitchell was no longer certain she would survive until dawn. Sarah spent that night huddled in the living room, every light blazing. Sleep was impossible. The wind screams grew more intense, more purposeful, until she could no longer pretend they were anything but voices. By 3 a.m, her hands shaking from too much coffee and fear, she finally gathered the courage to return to her aunt's journal. The entries grew increasingly frantic as she read. April 2nd, 1998. "I found the old newspapers in the basement today. Articles about the logging camp that used to be here in the 1920s. There was an accident, or they called it an accident. 30 men trapped in a cave-in during a storm. The rescue team said they could hear screaming for days, but the entrance was completely sealed. By the time they broke through, everyone was dead. The cabin was built on top of it all 10 years later. Built on their graves." April 15th, 1998. "The voices are clearer now. They're not just screaming, they're begging. Something happened down there, something worse than a cave-in. I found more records. Someone sealed that cave deliberately. Someone wanted those men to die." Sarah's blood ran cold as she read the final entry, dated May 1st, 1998. "They've shown me the truth. The cave-in wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just murder. It was a ritual. The foreman, William Blackwood, he was involved in something dark. The local tribes had warned him about this place, about what slept beneath the mountain. He thought he could control it, use it. The men discovered what he was doing, threatened to expose him. So he trapped them all down there, offered them as a sacrifice. But it wasn't enough. It's never enough. It's still hungry after all these years, and the souls of those men are still screaming, trying to warn others. I'm leaving tomorrow. I should burn this place down, but I can't. It won't let me. Maybe someone stronger will find a way to end this. God forgive me." Sarah dropped the journal, her mind reeling. Outside, the wind howled as if in response to her discovery, but now she could distinguish different voices within it, dozens of them, overlapping, desperate. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. A text from Lisa. "You didn't call. Are you okay?" Before she could respond, the power went out. The darkness was absolute, pressing against her eyes like a physical thing. Sarah fumbled for her phone's flashlight, casting wild shadows across the room. The temperature seemed to drop rapidly, her breath visible in the beam of light. A new sound joined the wind's chorus, a rhythmic thumping from somewhere beneath her feet, like someone, or something, pounding on the basement door. Sarah's legs moved before her mind could process what was happening. She found herself at the top of the basement stairs, hand hovering over the doorknob. The pounding grew louder, more insistent. "This is insane," she whispered. "This can't be real." But she knew it was. Her aunt's words echoed in her mind. "They've shown me the truth." The basement door flew open with such force it nearly knocked her down the stairs. Stale, cold air rushed up, carrying with it the smell of earth and decay. Her flashlight beam revealed rough stone steps descending into darkness. The screaming in the wind had stopped. Instead, she heard voices, clearer than ever, calling from below. "Help us. Show them. End this." Sarah's foot touched the first step. Something was pulling her down, an inexorable force that seemed to bypass her terror. She had to know, had to see. The basement was larger than it should have been, the walls rough-hewn stone instead of concrete. Her light revealed mining equipment, rusted with age, and beyond that, an opening in the far wall that couldn't possibly exist. Shouldn't exist, but it did, and as she approached, she saw the symbols carved around its frame. Ancient things, twisted sigils that hurt her eyes to look at. William Blackwood's handiwork. The opening led to a tunnel, and from its depths came a sound that wasn't wind, wasn't human screaming, but something far worse. Something ancient and hungry stirring in the dark. Sarah's light flickered, dimmed. The darkness seemed to pulse, to breathe. And in that moment, she understood what her aunt had fled from, what the voices had been trying to warn her about. This wasn't just a haunted cabin. It was a door, and it was opening. The last thing she saw before her light died completely was movement in the tunnel, a mass of shadows darker than the darkness itself, reaching for her with countless writhing tendrils. And then the real screaming began. Sarah ran. Her phone's light was dead, but she didn't need it. The basement was now illuminated by a sickly green glow emanating from the tunnel. The shadows pursued her, their touch like ice against her skin. She stumbled up the stairs, slammed the basement door, and threw her weight against it. But the door wasn't enough. Dark tendrils seeped through the cracks, and the wood itself began to warp and twist. The voices in the wind had reached a fever pitch, no longer warning but pleading. The symbols. Break the symbols. Her aunt's journal. There had been drawings, diagrams she barely glanced at. Sarah lunged for the bedroom, yanking open the drawer where she'd left the journal. Her trembling fingers flipped through pages until she found what she needed. A detailed sketch of the tunnel's entrance, with notes scribbled in the margins. Blackwood's binding runes. They don't just seal it in and they feed it. Every soul trapped here makes it stronger. The symbols must be broken to break the cycle. The basement door exploded inward. Sarah grabbed a flashlight from the bedside table and ran for the kitchen. She needed something, anything that could break stone. Her beam caught the glint of metal, a toolbox she'd noticed earlier, left by the previous caretaker. The shadows were filling the cabin now, and with them came a cold so intense it burned. Sarah's fingers closed around a hammer and chisel just as something grabbed her ankle. She kicked free, scrambling toward the basement steps. The thing in the tunnel was more visible now, a mass of writhing darkness with points of green light like cruel stars scattered throughout its bulk. Around it, transparent figures flickered and twisted. The trapped souls of the miners, bound to this place by Blackwood's dark ritual. Sarah forced herself to approach the tunnel entrance, chisel raised. The symbols seemed to squirm under her gaze, and touching them sent jolts of pain up her arm. But she could see where they were weakest, where decades of moisture had begun to erode the stone. She struck the first symbol just as the entity reached for her. The impact sent shockwaves through the basement, and the thing recoiled with a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in agony. Encouraged, Sarah struck another symbol, then another. Each blow weakened the barrier between worlds, but it also weakened Blackwood's hold over the trapped souls. The shadows grabbed her again, trying to pull her into the tunnel. But now other hands were helping her. Transparent, human hands. The souls of the miners, fighting back against their captor. They held the darkness at bay as Sarah continued her work, destroying the symbols one by one. When she struck the final rune, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The tunnel entrance blazed with blinding green light, and a sound like the mountain itself screaming filled the air. The entity thrashed and writhed, its form beginning to dissolve as its anchor to this world crumbled. Sarah felt the miner's hands pulling her back, away from the collapsing tunnel. The last thing she saw was William Blackwood himself, his spectral form appearing briefly in the maelstrom. He reached desperately for his creation, his face contorted in terror, before the darkness he'd imprisoned claimed him at last. The tunnel imploded with a thunderous roar, taking the basement floor with it. Sarah barely made it up the stairs before the whole chamber collapsed, sealing the horror away forever. Dawn found her sitting on the cabin's front steps, watching the sunrise. The wind still blew through the trees, but now it carried only natural sounds. No screams, no whispers, no desperate warnings. Her phone buzzed, multiple missed calls from Lisa. She'd have to come up with some explanation for all this. As she stood to go back inside, something caught her eye. Near the tree line, barely visible in the morning mist, stood a line of transparent figures. The miners, no longer trapped, no longer suffering. They tipped their ghostly hard hats to her, their faces peaceful at last, before fading away like dew in the sunlight. Sarah looked back at the cabin. It felt different now, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from its foundations. Her aunt's last journal entry had been wrong about one thing. She hadn't been too weak to end this. She'd simply known it wasn't her battle to fight. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat at her kitchen counter in Boston, staring at the divorce papers. With steady hands, she signed them at last. She had faced something ancient and evil, had stared into an abyss and emerged stronger. This, by comparison, was just paperwork. The cabin remained standing, no longer a prison for tortured souls, but a testament to survival. Sarah kept the key. She would return someday, she knew, not to hide, not to run away, but because she had earned her place there. She had brought peace to that troubled ground, had given rest to those long-suffering spirits, and on quiet nights, when the wind blows through the mountains of Vermont, it carries no screams, no warnings, no desperate pleas. Just the gentle whisper of leaves and the distant echo of a hard-won victory. Dr. Emmachin knew trees couldn't talk. As a botanist with 15 years of field experience, she understood better than most that while trees could communicate through chemical signals and underground fungal networks, they certainly couldn't whisper. Yet here she was, standing at the edge of the Blackwood Research Reserve, listening to what sounded unmistakably like whispered words coming from the ancient forest before her. The government grant had seemed too good to be true. Full funding for a 6-month study of an untouched old-growth forest, with particular attention to unusual growth patterns and potential undiscovered species. The only strange requirement had been the solitude clause. She had to conduct the research alone. No assistants, no team, no visitors. The ecosystem is incredibly delicate, the grant administrator had explained, not quite meeting her eyes. We can't risk contamination from too many human presences. Emma had jumped at the opportunity. After the academic scandal that had destroyed her reputation at Berkeley, accusations of fabricated data, though she knew what she'd seen in those samples, this was her chance at redemption. 6 months alone with her research, her instruments, and the trees. Perfect. The research station was better equipped than she'd expected. A solid 2-story structure with modern labs, living quarters, and enough supplies to last through winter. Solar panels and a backup generator provided power, and a satellite link gave her internet access, though the connection was spotty at best. It was her 3rd day when she first heard the whispers. She was taking core samples from an ancient oak, one of the largest she'd ever seen. When the wind shifted through the canopy above, the rustling leaves seemed to form patterns, almost like words. You shouldn't be here. Emma froze, the increment borer still embedded in the tree's trunk. She knew about audiopareidolia, the brain's tendency to find familiar patterns in random sounds. This had to be that. Just her mind playing tricks after too many hours alone in the woods. But when she pressed her ear to the bark, she heard something else. Not wind through leaves, but a deep, slow pulse, like a heartbeat. And beneath that, a sound like distant crying. "This is ridiculous," she said aloud, her voice too loud in the forest's sudden silence. "Trees don't have heartbeats. Trees don't cry." She pulled the core sample free and nearly dropped it. Instead of the expected rings of light and dark wood, the sample was streaked with what looked like blood. Emma stumbled backward, her equipment clattering to the forest floor. The red substance began to move, seeping from the tiny hole she drilled in the trunk. It wasn't blood, couldn't be blood, but it moved like it, forming patterns on the bark that looked disturbingly like letters before gravity pulled them downward. Her scientific mind kicked in, forcing down the panic. She fumbled for her sample collection kit, determined to document this. Whatever this substance was, it could explain the unusual readings she'd been getting since she arrived, the off-the-charts bioelectric measurements, the inexplicable heat signatures. As she collected the sample, the whispers returned, stronger now, coming from every direction. "Don't look, don't see. Too late. Already here. Should have listened." The voices overlapped, some high and desperate, others deep and guttural. None of them sounded human. Emma's hands shook as she sealed the sample vial. The forest had grown darker, though her watch showed it was only mid-afternoon. The massive oak trees seemed to loom over her, their branches reaching like gnarled hands. She needed to get back to the lab, to examine this under controlled conditions. This could be the discovery of the century. Some unknown type of sap, perhaps, or a new species of fungus with unusual properties. There had to be a rational explanation, but as she gathered her equipment, something caught her eye. 20 feet up the oak's trunk, where smooth bark should have been, she saw what looked like a face. Not carved, but formed by the wood itself, as if something had pushed out from within. The features were twisted in an expression of agony. Emma raised her camera with trembling hands, determined to document everything. But when she checked the viewfinder, her blood ran cold. It wasn't just one face. Every tree in view had them, dozens of faces pressed against their bark like drowning people against ice, their mouths open in silent screams. The whispers rose to a fever pitch. "She sees us. Can't let her leave. Needs to join. Become part." The wind picked up, but the branches didn't move with it. Instead, they seemed to move against it, reaching for her with deliberate purpose. The faces in the bark began to push outward, with cracking and splitting as they tried to emerge. Emma ran. She could hear movement behind her, the sound of splintering wood and rustling leaves. The path back to the research station seemed longer, twisting in ways she didn't remember. Had she taken a wrong turn? No, there was only one path. She'd marked it herself. But the trees were moving. She was sure of it now. The ancient oaks were sliding their roots free of the earth, changing position to block her route, to hem her in. And still those whispers followed, growing louder, more insistent. "Join us. Become one. Feed the forest." She burst through the tree line into the station's clearing, gasping for breath. Behind her, the forest had gone eerily still. The faces had vanished, the trees once again appearing normal and innocent. But Emma knew what she'd seen, just like she'd known what she'd seen in those samples at Berkeley, the ones nobody had believed her about. In her pocket, the vial of red sap pulsed warmly, like a living heart. Inside the station, Emma locked every door and window, though she suspected such precautions would mean little against whatever lived in this forest. She had to analyze the sample, had to prove what she'd seen was real. She wouldn't let them discredit her again. As darkness fell outside, she prepared her slides and powered up the electron microscope. She didn't notice that the red sample had begun to move on its own, or that the potted plants in her lab were slowly turning to face her, their leaves whispering secrets of their own. The electron microscope revealed impossibilities. The red substance's cellular structure was unlike anything Emma had ever seen. A hybrid of plant and animal tissue, constantly shifting and reorganizing itself as she watched. More disturbing were the structures that looked like neural networks, suggesting some form of consciousness. "This can't be real," she muttered, adjusting the magnification. Her hands still trembled slightly. Outside, the wind had picked up again, and with it came the whispers, more insistent now. "She knows too much. Show her the truth. Make her understand." Emma forced herself to focus on the microscope. The sample was changing more rapidly now, its cells multiplying at an impossible rate. She grabbed her phone, starting to record video documentation, but the screen showed only static. When she tried to access her laptop to log her findings, she found the satellite connection dead. A soft thud from the corner made her jump. One of her potted specimens, a simple fern she brought for comparative studies, had fallen from its shelf. But as she watched in horror, its roots began to move, stretching and twisting like fingers. The leaves unfurled with unnatural speed, reaching toward her. Emma backed away, knocking over her chair. All the plants in the lab were moving now, their leaves turning to track her movement. The whispers had grown louder, seeming to come from the specimens themselves. "Join us, Emma. See how we grow. Become part of something greater." She ran for the door, but the handle was covered in a web of thin green tendrils that recoiled at her touch. The wood of the door itself seemed to pulse, like the heartbeat she'd heard in the forest. When she looked closer, she could see patterns forming in the grain, the same agonized faces she'd seen in the trees. The red sample she'd collected had eaten through its vial, spreading across the lab bench like living mercury. It moved with purpose, forming letters, then words. "We have been waiting for you." "What are you?" Emma whispered, pressing her back against the far wall. "What do you want?" The answer came not in whispers, but in visions that flooded her mind. She saw the forest as it had been centuries ago, when the first settlers arrived. She saw their attempts to clear the land, to burn and cut away the ancient trees. And she saw what the forest did to them. The trees had defended themselves, but they had done more than that. They had absorbed their attackers, transformed them, made them part of the endless cycle of growth and decay. The faces in the bark were real, the preserved consciousness of hundreds of humans who had become one with the forest over generations. But it wasn't just punishment, it was evolution. The forest had learned from each human it absorbed, gaining knowledge, awareness, purpose. It had grown into something more than a collection of trees. It had become a vast, interconnected intelligence that spanned acres, thinking thoughts as slow and deep as centuries. And now it had chosen her. The visions showed her more. Other scientists who had come before her, their discoveries, their fates. The government grant wasn't what she'd thought. This wasn't a research project, it was a feeding ground. A place where the forest could safely acquire new minds, new knowledge. The samples at Berkeley, she gasped, understanding flooding in. They were from here, weren't they? Someone sent them. You wanted me to find them. The red liquid formed new words. Yes. You saw the truth. You were ready. The laboratory plants had reached her now, their leaves brushing against her skin with an almost gentle touch. Where they touched, she felt a tingling sensation, then a burning. Her fingers were beginning to turn green, chlorophyll flooding her cells. She should have been terrified, should have fought harder to escape. But the whispers had changed, becoming softer, almost seductive. Think of what you could learn. All the mysteries of life. Centuries of growth. Forever. Emma looked at her transforming hand with growing fascination. The pain was fading, replaced by a strange euphoria. She could feel something vast and ancient brushing against her consciousness. The collective awareness of the forest itself, offering to share its secrets. "Will I still be me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The answer came in a chorus of voices, human and inhuman. "You will be more." Through the laboratory windows, she could see the trees pressing closer to the building, their branches tapping against the glass like impatient fingers. The faces in their bark were clearer now, men and women from different eras, their expressions no longer agonized but transcendent. The transformation was spreading up her arms now, her skin taking on the texture of bark, her hair becoming like fine, green filaments. She could feel her consciousness expanding, connecting to the vast network of roots and fungi that linked the forest together. And she could feel the others, All the minds that had become part of this place, their knowledge and memories preserved and shared across the living network of trees. Scientists, settlers, travelers, each adding their understanding to the forest's growing intelligence. The whispers were inside her head now, welcoming her, showing her wonders she had never imagined. This was what she had always wanted, to understand, to discover, to know. As the last of her humanity began to fade, Emma Chin smiled. She had finally found where she belonged. 3 months later, Dr. James Peterson stood at the edge of the Blackwood Research Reserve, reading the email from his predecessor one last time. "I've made an incredible discovery, something that will change everything we know about plant consciousness and evolution. You need to come see this. Bring the equipment I've listed below. Come alone. Emma." The email had arrived 6 weeks after Dr. Chin's last official report. The grant administrators hadn't seemed concerned by her silence. If anything, they'd appeared unsurprised. Now James understood why they'd selected him as her replacement with such speed. He'd found similar samples in his own research, had written papers that hinted at impossible possibilities. Just like Emma had. The research station stood silent in the clearing, looking untouched except for the vines that had begun to creep up its walls. Inside, James found Emma's lab immaculate, every piece of equipment carefully cleaned and stored. Only the broken vial on the center bench and the strange stains spreading across the floor suggested anything unusual had occurred. Her notes were equally meticulous, detailing her discoveries up until that final day. The last entry caught his eye. "I understand now. Everything makes sense. The forest isn't just alive, it's evolving, growing, learning, and we can be part of it. We should be part of it. I can hear them all now, everyone who came before. Their whispers are beautiful." The writing trailed off into a series of green-tinged marks that looked disturbingly like root patterns. James felt the first whispers then, soft as silk against his consciousness. Another seeker, another mind. Show him. Let him see. He should have been frightened, should have run. Instead, he found himself walking deeper into the lab, drawn to Emma's electron microscope. A slide was still in place, forgotten, or perhaps left intentionally. What he saw changed everything. The sample was alive with impossible movement, cells dividing and transforming in patterns that defied biology as he knew it. But more than that, he saw intelligence in those patterns, purpose, design, consciousness. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, familiar yet changed. James turned slowly to find a figure standing in the doorway, though standing wasn't quite the right word. Dr. Emma Chin's form was there, but it was composed entirely of interwoven vines and leaves, her skin a tapestry of bark and lichen, her hair a cascade of fine, green filaments. "Emma?" In a way, her voice rustled like wind through leaves. "I'm more than I was. We all are." The whispers rose around them, a chorus of voices sharing fragments of knowledge, snippets of memory, promises of understanding. James saw his own research reflected back at him. All the questions he'd asked, all the mysteries he'd pursued. "You've suspected the truth for years," Emma said, extending a hand that bloomed with tiny flowers. "That's why they chose you, why they chose all of us. The forest needs minds like ours. Scientists, seekers, those who want to understand." "What is it?" James whispered. "What does it want?" "To grow, to learn, to evolve." Emma's smile was formed of shifting shadows and dappled light. "Humanity is so young, so brief, but we've achieved so much in such a short time. The forest has existed for millennia, gathering knowledge, but it needs human consciousness to take the next step, by absorbing us, by joining with us. A symbiosis beyond anything you've imagined." She gestured, and the walls of the lab seemed to dissolve, showing him the true forest, a vast network of consciousness spanning miles, every tree and neuron in an immense living mind. James saw them all then, dozens of human forms transformed like Emma. Their bodies merged with the forest while their minds remained intact, expanded, connected. Scientists, explorers, seekers of truth from across the centuries, all part of something greater. "Why show me this?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Because you have a choice. Emma's form shifted, becoming more human for a moment. That's what the forest has learned from us, the importance of choice. It used to take. Now it asks. The whispers surrounded him, showing him possibilities. Centuries of discovery, mysteries solved, knowledge gained and shared across an eternal network of minds. No death, no end, only growth and understanding. But there would be no going back. James looked down at his hands, remembering all the times they'd shaken with excitement over a new discovery. The forest offered endless discoveries, endless time to understand. And he would not be alone. Would never be alone again. Will it hurt? He asked. Emma's laugh was like rustling leaves. Birth always does. But it passes quickly. The transformation began with his feet, roots growing downward as his cells transformed one by one. The pain was intense but brief, replaced by a surge of connection as his consciousness expanded into the network. The whispers welcomed him, sharing their secrets freely now. He felt Emma's mind brush against his, along with countless others. Above, the forest canopy swayed with patterns of thought and memory, an endless dance of knowledge and growth. As the last of his human form merged with the forest, Dr. James Peterson understood the truth at last. The forest's whispers weren't secrets, they were invitations, and he had finally accepted his. Years later, new scientists would come to the Blackwood Research Reserve, drawn by mysterious samples and unexplained phenomena. They would find the research station empty save for meticulous notes and strange stains. And if they listened carefully, they would hear the forest whisper, offering them knowledge, purpose, transformation. For the forest was patient, and it had learned well from its human parts. It would wait until the right minds came seeking answers, and then it would offer them the ultimate discovery, the chance to become part of an endless story, written in leaves and bark and roots, whispered forever through ancient trees. The whispers would continue, calling to those who were ready to learn, ready to grow, ready to transcend their brief human existence and join something greater. And in time, perhaps all seekers of truth would find their way to this place, where the forest whispers secrets to those brave or curious enough to listen. Marcus Reynolds wasn't supposed to find the shack. He'd been hiking the Appalachian Trail, following his well-marked maps, when an unexpected storm forced him to take shelter. The rain had come suddenly, turning the autumn afternoon dark as twilight, and the narrow path he'd chosen as an escape route wasn't on any of his maps. The shack emerged from the mist like an afterthought, a small, weathered structure that looked like it had grown from the forest floor rather than being built. Its wooden walls were gray with age, the small windows dark and grimy. But it was shelter, and with night falling and the storm showing no signs of letting up, Marcus didn't have much choice. The door creaked open at his touch, swinging inward to reveal a single room. The interior was surprisingly clean, if Spartan, a narrow cot against one wall, a pot-bellied stove, a crude table with a single chair. No dust, no cobwebs, though the place looked like it hadn't seen use in decades. "Hello?" Marcus called out, water dripping from his rain gear. "Anyone here?" Only the storm answered, rain drumming against the tin roof. He switched on his flashlight, examining the space more carefully. No signs of recent habitation, but also no signs of abandonment. It was as if the shack existed in some strange state of suspension, neither used nor unused. As he shed his wet outer layers, Marcus noticed something odd about the floor. The wooden planks were old but solid, except for a circular section in the center of the room. There, the boards had been laid in a perfect spiral pattern, like a wooden whirlpool frozen in time. "Weird architectural choice," he muttered, setting up his sleeping bag on the cot. The storm had brought in early darkness, and his phone showed no signal. He'd have to wait until morning to figure out where he'd gotten off track. The humming started just after sunset. At first, it was so faint he thought he was imagining it, a low, almost subsonic vibration that he felt more than heard. But as full dark settled outside, the sound grew stronger. It seemed to be coming from beneath the spiral pattern in the floor, rising up through the boards like steam. Marcus pressed his ear to the floor, curiosity overcoming caution. The hum had a pattern to it, almost musical but not quite. It reminded him of Tibetan singing bowls he'd heard at a meditation retreat, but deeper, more primal. The longer he listened, the more complex the sound became. There were layers to it, harmonies that seemed to shift and change. And underneath it all, something that sounded almost like words. He didn't realize he'd been lying there for over an hour until his phone buzzed an alert. Low battery. The screen showed 9:47 p.m., though it felt much later. The humming had grown louder, and now the spiral pattern in the floor seemed to be moving. Marcus blinked hard, sure his eyes were playing tricks on him. But no. The wooden boards were definitely shifting, rotating slowly counterclockwise, though they made no sound beyond that strange, deep hum. He scrambled backward, heart pounding. This wasn't possible. Wood didn't move like that. Floors didn't turn themselves into spirals. And yet, the humming rose in pitch and intensity, and now he could definitely make out words within it, though in no language he recognized. The spiral was spinning faster, the boards rippling like liquid, and in the center, a darkness was growing. Not just an absence of light, but something deeper, older, hungrier. Marcus grabbed for his pack, but his legs wouldn't move. The humming had penetrated his bones, vibrating through his body at a frequency that rendered him helpless. All he could do was watch as the spiral continued to spin, the darkness at its center expanding like a pupil dilating. That's when he saw the hands reaching up from the void, dozens of them, pale and grasping, their fingers elongated and wrong. And behind them, in the depths of that impossible darkness, something vast was stirring. The hands were getting closer, stretching toward him with eager purpose. And still that humming continued, growing louder, more insistent, until it filled his head with alien harmonies that threatened to drown out all other thought. In that moment, Marcus Reynolds realized two things with perfect clarity. He was not the first person to find this shack, and if he didn't find a way to move, he wouldn't be the last. The hands were inches from Marcus's feet when his paralysis finally broke. He lunged for the door, but the humming changed pitch, and suddenly the walls themselves began to ripple and flow. The door he'd entered through was gone, replaced by seamless wooden panels that pulsed with the same rhythm as the floor. The spiral had become a true vortex now, boards flowing like water toward that central void. The hands continued to reach, and now he could see faces emerging behind them. Pale, stretched things with black holes for eyes and mouths frozen in eternal screams. Marcus pressed himself against the writhing wall, fumbling with his phone. The screen lit up, casting weird shadows across the transforming room. Through the camera's lens, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The spiral pattern wasn't just in the floor. It continued through it, down into impossible depths, like a gigantic wooden screw boring into the earth itself. And wrapped around that spiral, descending into darkness, were bodies. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, their forms twisted and elongated as if they'd been stretched by some immense force. Some were recent. He recognized modern clothing, hiking gear like his own. Others were older, wearing clothes from different eras, all the way back to colonial garments now rotted and decayed. The humming had become a song, and to his horror, Marcus realized he could understand it now. Not with his ears, but with something deeper, more primitive in his brain. Join us down below, where the spiral never ends, where time flows like water and flesh melds with wood. The voices were coming from the trapped souls themselves, their endless descent converted into that terrible melody. They were calling to him, begging him to join them in their eternal journey downward. His phone's light flickered and died, plunging him back into darkness broken only by a sickly glow from the central void. The hands were closer now, almost touching him. In their pale flesh, he could see patterns like wood grain, as if they were transforming into something neither fully human nor fully tree. "Help us." One voice broke free from the chorus, sounding almost human. "It's so hungry. Been feeding it so long." Marcus's back hit something that wasn't wall, a small shelf he hadn't noticed before. His fingers found something smooth and cylindrical. A flashlight? No, an old oil lamp, the glass clouded with age but the reservoir still full. His hands shook as he found matches in his pocket. The first two broke, but the third caught. The lamp's wick sputtered to life, casting warm light across the room. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The hands recoiled from the flame, retreating back into the void. The humming took on a higher, almost pained pitch. The wooden walls stopped their undulation, though they still trembled like flesh trying to contain something massive. In the lamp's steady light, Marcus could see markings carved into the walls that had been invisible before. Protective symbols, he realized, though most had been covered by years of growing wood. The shack wasn't just a trap. It had once been a prison, meant to contain whatever dwelled in that spiral darkness. But the barriers were failing. The wood was alive now, responding to that thing's will rather than the old wards that had kept it bound. Even as he watched, the symbols were being distorted by the living wood, twisted into new patterns that enhanced the humming rather than containing it. A rhythmic pounding began beneath the floor, like massive heartbeats. The spiral's rotation slowed, but grew more deliberate, hypnotic. Marcus found his eyes drawn to the center despite his terror. The void seemed deeper now, and in its depths, something massive was rising. He saw it first as a suggestion of movement, a darker shadow within shadows. Then features began to emerge, a vast, pale face formed of countless smaller faces, all twisted in agony or ecstasy. Eyes like wells of darkness opened across its surface, and a mouth large enough to swallow him, whole split into a grin that stretched beyond the bounds of physics. The humming became words, spoken directly into his mind. So long alone, so long hungry. Come join my collection. Marcus backed away until he hit the wall, holding the lamp before him like a shield. The light seemed weaker now, flickering as the thing rose higher. He could feel its hunger as a physical force, pulling at him like gravity. The floor beneath his feet began to soften, wood turning to liquid. He was sinking, the spiral's pull growing stronger. The lamp was his only defense, but the oil wouldn't last forever. As his feet began to sink into the wooden floor, Marcus Reynolds realized he had to make a choice. Face whatever horrors lay in that bottomless spiral, or try something desperate before the lamp's light failed. The thing in the void watched him with its constellation of eyes, still grinning that impossible grin, confident in its power. It had waited so long, trapped in this pocket of twisted space. It could wait a few minutes more. It didn't realize that Marcus had already seen something it hadn't meant to show him. A weakness hidden in plain sight, revealed in that moment when the protective symbols had become visible. He just hoped he would survive testing his theory. The lamp's flame guttered, and Marcus made his move. Instead of backing away from the void, he stepped toward it. The humming rose to a fever pitch, triumphant, as the thing in the darkness reached for him with its countless stolen hands. But Marcus wasn't surrendering. He'd seen how the hands recoiled from the lamp's flame, how the living would shrank from its light. And he'd seen something else in those brief moments when the protective symbols were visible, traces of oil soaked into the wood around the spiral, ancient and dark. He swung the lamp hard, shattering it against the nearest section of floor. Burning oil splashed across the wooden boards, igniting instantly. The humming turned to a shriek as flames raced along the spiral pattern, following channels that had been carved into the wood centuries ago. The thing in the void recoiled, its massive form writhing as the fire spread. The hands withdrew into the darkness, and the faces in its surface contorted in pain. Marcus felt its grip on reality weaken as ancient bindings, dormant but not dead, awakened in the wood. Clever little morsel. The voice in his head was filled with rage and something else, respect, perhaps, or amusement. But fire dies. I remain. Maybe, Marcus gasped, fighting against the spiral's pull. But I saw the symbols. I know what you are now. The thing laughed, a sound like breaking minds. And what am I, little scholar? A parasite. Marcus's voice grew stronger as understanding filled him. You feed on human consciousness, use our minds to maintain your form in this reality. That's what the spiral is, a way to keep your victims conscious eternally while you feed on them. But the original builders of this place, they knew how to contain you. The fire was spreading faster now, following hidden paths in the wood. With each new flame, another of the original binding symbols revealed itself, burning with a light that was more than physical. They are long dead, the thing growled. Their knowledge died with them. Not all of it. Marcus reached into his pocket, withdrew a small notebook. While you were trying to hypnotize me with your humming, I was copying down what I could see of the symbols. An anthropologist never goes anywhere without a field journal. The thing's countless eyes widened. In its moment of shock, Marcus began to recite the words he'd hastily scribbled, phonetic approximations of what he'd seen carved into the walls, fragments of a binding ritual far older than the shack itself. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The humming turned discordant, its harmonies shattering. The hands reaching from the void began to dissolve, and the massive face fractured like breaking ice. You cannot, the thing howled. I have existed for millennia. In this form, maybe. Marcus continued the chant, his voice growing stronger as he felt power flow through the ancient words. But everything that exists can be bound. Everything that hunts can be caged. The fire had spread to the walls now, revealing more symbols, giving him more words to work with. Each syllable was like a chain, each phrase another bar in an ancient prison that was rebuilding itself. The spiral began to reverse its rotation, and now it was the thing's turn to be pulled downward. The faces trapped in its form screamed, not in pain this time, but in relief. As the binding took hold, its grip on its victims began to weaken. Marcus watched in awe as forms began to emerge from the void. People pulled from the thing's dissolving mass. Most were barely more than shadows, souls too long trapped to maintain human form. They swirled around the room like smoke, drawn upward through the shack's roof, finally free to move on. But some were more substantial. 3 hikers from recent years, still solid enough to climb out of the spiral. An old man in clothes from the 1950s. A young woman in a torn dress from the 1920s. All stumbling, confused, but alive. The thing thrashed and fought, but each movement only entangled it further in the renewed bindings. Its form was compressing, being forced back into the containment space beneath the shack that had held it for so long. This changes nothing. It raged as it sank. I will wait. I will grow strong again. And next time... There won't be a next time, Marcus said, speaking the final words of the binding, because I'm going to make sure everyone knows about this place. Not to stay away, but to maintain the bindings. To keep you locked in your spiral prison forever. The last thing he saw was that massive face contorting in fury before it vanished into the void. The spiral sealed itself with a sound like thunder, the boards locking back into their original pattern. The humming faded to silence. Outside, the storm had passed. Dawn was breaking as Marcus and the other survivors emerged from the shack. They were weak, disoriented, but alive. Already, their time in the spiral was fading like a nightmare, though none of them would ever completely forget. Marcus spent the next week documenting everything. The symbols, the binding words, the history he managed to piece together from local records and the survivors' scattered memories. He published his findings in obscure anthropological journals and online forums dedicated to the unexplained. The shack still stands in those unnamed woods, off any marked trail. It still hums at night, but the sound is different now. Not a hungry call, but the straining of ancient bonds holding something imprisoned. And if you find yourself near it during a storm, you might be tempted to seek shelter within. If you do, you'll see a spiral pattern in the floor, and you might hear a faint humming. But you'll also see new symbols carved into the walls, carefully maintained, and a logbook filled with the names of those who've come to reinforce the bindings. For while the thing in the spiral still hungers, it is no longer alone in its endless night. Now it has guardians, keeping watch, ensuring it remains nothing more than a story about a shack that hums in the darkness. Detective Anna Martinez first noticed something was wrong when she reviewed the security footage. The suspect walked through the bank's lobby at 2:14 p.m., approached the counter, and committed a perfectly ordinary robbery. Everything about him was unremarkable. Average height, brown hair, generic business suit. Except for one detail that made her rewind the tape 3 times to be sure. He cast no shadow. The fluorescent lights overhead should have created clear shadows beneath him, just like they did for everyone else in the frame. But there was nothing. It was as if light simply passed through him, or perhaps around him, in ways that defied physics. "You're obsessing," her partner, David Chun, said when she pointed it out. Probably just a weird camera angle or a glitch in the recording, but Anna couldn't let it go. Something about the man's movements seemed wrong, too smooth, too precise, like an animation running at slightly the wrong speed. And then there were the witnesses' statements, all of which described him differently. Tall man, dark hair, spoke with an accent. Short, blonde guy, definitely local. Medium build, red hair, had a limp. The only consistent detail was that none of them could remember his face clearly, as if their minds simply slid away from his features. The robbery itself was strange too. He'd taken exactly $27,413, not a round number, not the contents of a specific drawer, but that precise amount. The teller had handed it over without triggering any alarms, though she couldn't recall why. When asked to describe their interaction, she burst into tears. "I felt so cold," was all she could say, like something was pulling the warmth right out of me. Anna spent 3 days reviewing similar cases across the state. She found 5 that matched the pattern. Precise amounts stolen, witnesses who couldn't agree on descriptions, and surveillance footage that showed inconsistencies. Not just missing shadows, but moments where the suspect seemed to flicker, or where his movements didn't quite match natural human motion. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. Dr. Eleanor Wright, a professor of theoretical physics at the local university, reached out after seeing the police sketch on the news. "I need to show you something," she said when Anna met her in her cluttered office. "But you have to promise to keep an open mind." The professor pulled up a series of photographs on her computer. They showed what appeared to be the same man, unchanged, in images spanning nearly a century. 1924, Chicago. 1953, London. 1978, Tokyo. 1996, Sao Paulo. Dr. Wright clicked through them rapidly. And now here, always the same MO. He takes a specific amount of money, no one can describe him clearly, and he leaves witnesses feeling cold and drained. "That's impossible," Anna said, but her voice lacked conviction. She'd seen the footage, seen the way light behaved wrongly around him. "What if I told you he's not stealing money at all?" Dr. Wright leaned forward, her eyes intense. "What if the cash is just a cover for what he's really taking?" "Which is time." The professor pulled up a complex graph on her screen, or more specifically, human moments, memories, experiences, pieces of lives. The financial transactions are just a smokescreen. "He's harvesting something far more valuable." Anna's head spun. "You're saying he's what? Some kind of time vampire?" "I'm saying he's not from here. Not from this plane of existence, for lack of a better term. He's like a 3-dimensional shadow of a 4-dimensional being, projecting into our reality to feed." It sounded crazy, but it explained the missing shadow, the way witnesses couldn't focus on him, the cold sensation people reported. A being that existed partially outside normal space-time would appear to break all the rules of physics that governed ordinary matter. "How do you know all this?" Anna asked. Dr. Wright's face darkened. "Because 20 years ago, I helped him cross over. I was young, brilliant, too ambitious for my own good. I thought I was advancing science, opening doors to new dimensions. Instead, I gave him a way in. And now," she rolled up her sleeve, revealing skin that looked oddly transparent, as if it were slowly fading from reality. "He's been feeding for a century, detective, growing stronger. And recently, he's been taking more than just moments. He's starting to take people, whole lives, erased from existence. How do we stop him?" "That's the problem." Dr. Wright's voice shook slightly. "He's noticed me tracking him. Last night, I saw him standing outside my house. No shadow, no reflection, just watching. And this morning," she held up her hand. Anna gasped. The professor's fingers were becoming translucent, like sea glass held up to light. "I'm fading, detective. He's taking me, piece by piece. And I don't think I'm the only one." Before Anna could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Chin. "Another robbery. Same MO. First National on 5th Street. You need to see this." Attached was a single image from the security camera. It showed their suspect at the counter, and standing right behind him, unnoticed by everyone in the frame, was Dr. Wright. Not the living woman sitting across from Anna, but a transparent version of her, mouth open in a silent scream as she was pulled into the man's shadowless form. When Anna looked up from her phone, the professor was crying. "It's already happening," she whispered. "That was yesterday. I'm just an echo now, a memory that hasn't quite faded. You have to stop him, detective, before he takes everyone. Before he—" Dr. Wright's voice cut off abruptly. Her form flickered like bad reception, becoming increasingly transparent. Anna reached for her, but her hands passed through empty air. The professor was gone, leaving behind only her research and a lingering cold that seemed to seep into Anna's bones. Outside the office window, a shadowless figure stood in the parking lot, looking up and smiling. Detective Martinez spent the next 48 hours immersed in Dr. Wright's research. The professor's office remained exactly as it had been, as if the university had somehow forgotten she'd ever existed. Her name wasn't on the door anymore, and when Anna asked about her, the department secretary gave her a blank look. "We haven't had a theoretical physics professor since Dr. Emerson retired in 2019, she'd said. But the research was still there, papers, notebooks, hard drives full of data. It was as if the being could erase people, but not their physical effects on the world. Not yet, anyway. The mathematics were beyond her, but the implications were clear enough. Dr. Wright had discovered what she called temporal parasitism, the ability to feed on human experiences, memories, and ultimately entire existences. Her notes described the being as a fourth-dimensional predator that had evolved to hunt across time itself. They're like anglerfish in the deep ocean, one entry read. They evolved to fill a niche we didn't even know existed. They feed on consciousness itself, on the quantum coherence that makes up human awareness and memory. And they're getting hungry." The most disturbing part was a series of calculations showing an exponential increase in the being's feeding pattern. It had started small, taking minutes here, hours there, leaving people with odd gaps in their memories. But as it grew stronger, it began taking whole days, then weeks. Now it could consume entire lives. And it was accelerating. Anna's phone rang, startling her from her research. It was Chun. "You need to see the new footage," he said without preamble. "It's getting worse." At the station, Chun played the security tape from that morning's robbery. The shadowless man was there, but he wasn't alone. Behind him trailed a procession of transparent figures. Men, women, children, all being slowly absorbed into his form. Some she recognized from missing persons reports. Others were completely unknown, as if they'd been taken from times or places not yet discovered. "Watch this," Chun said, freezing the frame. He pointed to one of the transparent figures, a young boy, maybe 7 years old. "That's my son." Anna's blood ran cold. "Tommy? But he's at home with Sarah. Is he?" Chen's voice cracked. "I have these memories of a son, photos on my phone, a room full of toys. But Sarah says we never had children. That we tried, but—" He showed her his phone. The family photos he'd always kept as his background were gone. "David, listen to me." Anna grabbed his arm. "I remember Tommy. I was at his 6th birthday party. He exists. Not anymore." Chen's eyes were hollow. "I'm losing him, piece by piece. Every hour, another memory fades. Soon he'll be gone completely, and I'll be like Sarah. Certain we never had a child at all." Anna felt sick. The being wasn't just taking people. It was erasing them from history itself, unraveling the very fabric of their existence. And somehow, she and Chan were among the few who could still remember its victims. She spread Dr. Wright's research across her desk, searching frantically for answers. There had to be a way to stop it, to restore what had been taken. That's when she found the notebook hidden inside the professor's desk drawer, a personal journal, different from her academic notes. The final entry was dated the day before she vanished. "I know how to stop it. The barrier between dimensions isn't just scientific, it's psychological. It feeds on human consciousness, yes, but that means it's vulnerable to it as well. If someone could maintain absolute certainty in the face of its unreality, could hold on to memories it tries to erase, but the risk is enormous. Direct confrontation would mean opening oneself completely to its influence. One moment of doubt, and you'd be erased not just from present reality, but from all reality. Every moment you ever lived, every life you ever touched, gone in an instant. A theory began to form in Anna's mind. The being fed on uncertainty, on the mind's inability to hold on to what it knew to be real when faced with impossibility. That's why people couldn't remember its face, why witnesses gave contradictory descriptions. It induced a kind of cognitive dissonance that made reality itself unstable. But what if someone could maintain perfect certainty? What if they could hold on to reality so tightly that the being couldn't unravel it? Her phone buzzed. Another bank robbery in progress. Same location as the first one, as if it were starting a new cycle. "I'm going," she told Chun. "You can't face it alone." "I won't be alone." She gathered up Dr. Wright's research. "I'll have every memory it's ever tried to steal, every life it's tried to erase, including Tommy's." Chen's eyes filled with tears. "I can barely remember his face now." "Then give me your memories of him. Every birthday, every bedtime story, every scraped knee you bandaged. Give me something to hold on to." For the next hour, Chun talked, and Anna wrote everything down. Every detail of Tommy's life, every moment that proved he had existed. She added her own memories, and then began gathering others. Photos of Dr. Wright, statements from the bank teller, everything she could find that proved these people had been real. As she worked, she felt something shifting in her mind. A kind of crystallization of certainty. The more details she gathered, the more real everything became, until she could hold entire lives in her memory like diamonds. The being fed on doubt, on the mind's tendency to let go of what it couldn't comprehend. But Anna Martinez was learning to do the opposite, to hold on to reality so tightly that nothing could take it away. When she finished preparing, she armed herself not with her service weapon, but with a notebook full of memories and a mind sharpened to a razor's edge of certainty. The shadowless man was waiting. She could feel his hunger from across the city. "I remember," she whispered to herself. "I remember everyone." The bank was empty when Anna arrived, though it should have been busy with afternoon customers. The air felt thin, as if reality itself was being stretched too far. And there, at the counter, stood the man with no shadow. He turned to face her, and Anna understood why witnesses couldn't describe him. His features were like water, constantly flowing and reforming, impossible to focus on. Behind him trailed his procession of victims, transparent shapes being slowly digested by his impossible form. "You remember." His voice was wrong, like multiple people speaking slightly out of sync. "How fascinating." "I remember everything," Anna said, her voice steady. "Tommy Chun, 6 years old, loves dinosaurs and peanut butter sandwiches cut into triangles. Dr. Eleanor Wright, brilliant physicist who made one terrible mistake. Every person you've taken, every life you've tried to erase." The being's form rippled with interest. "Memories fade. Reality adjusts. It's the nature of time. Not these memories." Anna opened her notebook, though she didn't need to read from it anymore. The details were crystallized in her mind, utterly certain and real. Maria Suarez, taken in 1924, was teaching her daughter to make empanadas when you found her. The recipe is still in her family's cookbook, even though they can't remember who wrote it. The being took a step toward her, and the cold intensified. Anna felt reality trying to warp around her, felt her memories trying to slip away. But she held on to them, each one a shield against his influence. James O'Connor, 1953, was walking his dog in Hyde Park. The dog lived another 12 years, waiting at the same spot every day, though everyone forgot who it was waiting for. "Stop," the being commanded. But there was a note of uncertainty in its voices now. Yuki Tanaka, 1978, was born with a scar on her left hand. Her mother still reaches to touch it sometimes, though she doesn't remember having a daughter. With each memory she spoke aloud. The transparent figures behind him became more solid. They were fighting now, pushing against the unreality that had swallowed them. The being's form was becoming unstable, rippling violently. You cannot hold on to them all. The human mind isn't capable of such certainty. "Watch me." Anna stepped forward, her voice growing stronger. Tommy Chin scored the winning goal in his first soccer game last spring. Dr. Wright drinks Earl Grey tea with honey and keeps spare chalk in her right desk drawer. Maria Suarez's empanadas need exactly half a teaspoon of cumin. Each detail was a blade, cutting through the being's carefully constructed unreality. The transparent figures were almost fully visible now, and more were appearing. Hundreds of victims stretching back through time, all fighting to remember themselves. The being lunged at her, its form dissolving into a mass of hungry shadow. Anna felt it try to latch onto her consciousness, to begin unraveling her existence. The cold was unbearable, and for a moment, she felt herself starting to fade. But she held on to her memories, not just of the victims, but of herself. Every case she'd solved, every birthday celebrated, every cup of coffee shared with Chan. She was real, and so were they all. You exist, she told the gathered souls, her voice ringing with certainty. You've always existed, and existence, once recognized, cannot be undone. The being screamed, a sound that transcended dimensions. Its form began to collapse in on itself, unable to maintain cohesion in the face of such unshakable reality. The victims it had collected were breaking free, becoming solid, becoming real. What have you done? It howled in its many voices. Restored the balance, Anna said. You fed on uncertainty, on humanity's inability to face the impossible. But we're stronger than you thought. Our memories, our connections, our reality. They're not just facts to be erased. They're part of who we are. The being was compressing now, forced into a singularity by the weight of all the memories it could no longer suppress. With a sound like reality itself tearing, it collapsed into nothingness, leaving behind only a fading cold and a shadow that finally matched its true form. Around Anna, people were returning to existence. Dr. Wright solidified near her old office, her research still intact. The bank teller remembered her encounter, but now the memory was powerless to harm her. And somewhere across town, Chun was holding his son, both of them fully real and present. The restoration wasn't perfect. Some memories remained fragmented, some connections had to be rebuilt. But the people themselves were back, drawn into existence by the strength of shared memories and unshakable certainty. Anna found Dr. Wright in her office, already documenting what had happened. You realize the truth, the professor said. That consciousness isn't just passive awareness. It's an active force that shapes reality itself. I realize that memories aren't just records of the past, Anna replied. They're anchors that hold reality together. And if you hold on to them tightly enough, nothing can break that connection. In the following weeks, Anna helped the returned victims piece their lives back together. Some, like Tommy, slipped seamlessly back into existence, their absences healings like wounds that had never been. Others needed more help, more memories to hold on to. She kept the notebook, adding new details as she found them, making sure nothing would ever be truly forgotten again. And sometimes, on quiet nights, she could feel other shadowless hunters out there in the dark, searching for prey. But she wasn't worried. She knew now that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in denying the impossible, but in facing it with unshakable certainty in what was real, what was true, what was worth remembering. And somewhere in her notebook, a new entry appeared in Dr. Wright's handwriting. They feed on forgetting, but we live through remembrance. As long as someone remembers, we can never truly be erased. The man with no shadow was gone, but his legacy remained. A reminder that in a universe full of impossible things, the most powerful force was still the human capacity to hold onto what was real, what was true, and what was loved. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more like it, please don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing and clicking the notification bell to join our storytelling community. Your support means the world to me. Until next time, sweet dreams, or perhaps pleasant nightmares.